So thank you for the opportunity to speak. And as you said, I'm a new consultant at the Evelina Children's Hospital. So I started in November 2019, so just kind of 6 months pretty much into that. And what I hope I can share with you this evening is some of the hints and tips, some of the information and some of the things that I've gained over the training period. And hopefully I'm not so long into the consultant that I still remember and can straddle across and give you a little bit of insight as to what might be useful at different stages of training. I've done a little bit more leadership and management experience than just within my training alone. So I did 2 out of program experiences. One was a leadership and management fellowship, and the other was an education fellowship. So I'm happy to talk about those or answer questions around that as we go through the session or towards the end. But yes, we'll get started and see where we can get to tonight. So my first thing is really to say what would be useful for you. So I know that we've got the chat feature, and Katie's very kindly keeping an eye on that for any questions that come up. But this is your time. You've given it up. It's the evening. It's 6:30. You could be doing lots of other things. Maybe not so many in lockdown, but certainly a few other things than just listening to me. So do let me know what would be useful and what you'd like to get out of the session. And if it's not already covered, we can come to it at the end. This is what the RCPCH Progress Domain 6 looks at. So this is here because some of you may or may not have read the domain before this evening. I know that you've been having sessions all week, so you're probably quite familiar. But what I really wanted to draw your attention to with this is that you go from in level 1 really being asked to recognise and start reflecting on your own leadership through to level 3 where you're expected to lead and manage a multidisciplinary team. And that is a huge undertaking to get from being aware that this team exists to then being expected to lead that team. And similar to a lot of the clinical skills that you develop over time, you wouldn't expect to just suddenly arrive at it. Obviously, there are charismatic leaders, people who are naturally talented at various aspects of leadership, but it's not something that is necessarily just a natural gift. And there's lots of skills you can definitely learn along the way. So I don't think you have to worry if you're not the next Obama. There are ways of being a leader that are very different, and there are lots of different types, and that's something I'd like people to take away from the evening. Really importantly is actually this slide, which some of you may have accessed on the RCPCH website, which is what does the domain of leadership mean to young people? And there are a few quotes there from the young people from RCPCH and us, but I think one thing that strikes me about a lot of the quotes, particularly the top one, which is remember to coordinate between teams with an awareness of the impact on the life of the family with a long-term condition, having lots of appointments and tests, is that really leadership in the NHS is about helping your patients and your team to navigate the system. And you can't really help to do that if you don't understand the system you're in or how you work best within that system. So I think we owe it, if this is what young people are telling us they want us to take away from leadership, to actually try and understand that. And I know that you've been having sessions this week on the structure of the NHS, finance in the NHS, and those things are really worth a bit of attention, just so that you have a grasp and a knowledge of what's going on across the board. So I'm not going to go into that in huge detail tonight, but just encourage you to see the kind of transferability as a trainee to understanding those systems. This is my old trusty car that I no longer have, which for those of you that are younger might not remember having wind-up windows, but that's what it had. But anyway, leadership in training, I think, is a lot like filling up a car. So you are filling up the tank with petrol to get you on the different parts of the journey, and throughout it, you're topping things up over time to be able to make those shorter journeys, and eventually you kind of know which destination you want to get to. But much like a car, you can't get from A to B if you don't know how to drive. So you need to know how to drive, which is a bit about your leadership skills. You can, if you don't know how to drive, you do know if the car looks good or not. And you do know if you feel safe when someone else is driving you. So there's a lot about observing what's happening around you that you can take during your training, which is all vital and shouldn't be passed off as just experience that isn't worth reflecting on. And the other thing is that unless you're really skilled and one of your hobbies is fixing cars, you're not going to try and fix the car yourself. You'll actually find other people's skill sets can complement your ability to drive the car by knowing how to fix it, knowing what works, knowing what doesn't. And if you can think about your leadership like that, then I find that quite a helpful analogy. I know that other people will talk about building a toolkit and having different skills at different times, but I'm quite visual, so this works for me. And I get to show you my old car. So what I would quite like you to do now, and just so we can test the chat function really, is just to think about a positive leader or a positive leadership moment that you've witnessed recently, and what went well, but most importantly, why did it go well? I'm very happy to share one of mine whilst people are thinking and building up to writing something down or trying to remember something good. I hope this doesn't mean that you've not seen a positive leadership moment, but we had one very recently, which was just a couple of days ago, where one of my colleagues had rewritten the rota for about the 9th time, and the juniors have been incredible at managing that change. And we thought that we might be able to move the rota back a little bit. But actually, when this colleague was listening to the feedback, they said, actually, we're going to hold off. I'm going to listen to what you're saying, and we're not going to change it, even although we probably could, because we want to give everyone a week to get used to that idea that things are changing again. And we have the privilege at this point not to have to be so quick at changes. So I think that was a really positive leadership experience, and it went well because the person listened and realized that they didn't have the full perspective. So they were able to listen. So we've got a couple of things on the chat where people are saying, sharing your goal with the team. So yeah, being inclusive in your leadership is really important. And consultants engage with junior doctor concerns, helping to think through perspective. And I think that's a big thing about understanding as a junior trainee, the perspective of not just where you are coming from, but the whole of your organization and your trust. And you can get that from different places. And we'll talk a little bit later about stakeholders and how you involve people in leadership. So what I would say for trainees is to think a little bit, and for those of you that have heard me maybe talk before, you'll maybe remember me talking about this, is about where you have influence. So you can move and you can gain influence in different places, but essentially you will have influence on yourself. You might have influence within a team, and you might, depending on your position or what you're involved in, have influence on the system. But the skill set you need for each of these areas is slightly different. So you can make changes that affect you and you alone much more easily without negotiation, without change for a lot of other people, before you can then do that with your team or the system. So we've talked before about if you want to make a change for yourself and you want to lead by an example, that often starting with an N of 1, with you trying the change first, is going to be much more effective, and then pulling in a couple of people and saying, like, I've tried this, it's worked for me, do you think it would work for you? And then spreading it out, rather than saying this is a massive change that has to happen right now. Obviously, what we've seen recently and what's been shared in a lot of the other sessions is about responding to situations beyond your control. So if something actually affects the whole system, then everything within the system will have to change. So that's things like pandemics, obviously. You can't just change your own attitude to that. You have to change the system. And the routes and the communication involved in that are very different. So just think a little bit as a trainee, especially when you're moving trusts and things a lot and moving teams a lot, about where do you have influence and how can you enhance that influence to get things moving if you think that you need to. The other things that are useful to think about if you're starting off on your leadership journey, or you're trying to pull things in that will help you to be honing your leadership skills, is the GROW model, which people may or may not have heard of. But GROW is used in lots of different industries. It's an acronym that the business world are very au fait with, and it stands for goal, reality, options, and will. And goal is setting out and thinking about what do you want to achieve. Is it SMART? Can you be motivated to achieve that, either individually, as a team, or as a system? Really, really thinking about the reality of a situation. So what is the current situation? You fully assess it and think, what are the challenges that we're facing, and why is it not working the way we want it to? And then what are the options? And this is the bit where I think it's quite exciting, because you can think kind of broadly around what you might do next. And then the will. So do you have the people in your team? What actions can you take? And that's what the will stands for. So that's quite a useful model if you're starting off a project, or if you're just trying to think about you as an individual and your leadership skills. What are you wanting to achieve with your skills? The college have set out that you should be able to plan and run a multidisciplinary team. Is that where your ambition is for consultancy, or do you have other things that you want to be able to do as part of your leadership? And what's the reality of where you are now? Are you in a position where you feel like you've got some skills and you want more? Are you really finding that you don't know what leadership and management really means? You know, that everybody's at a different stage, and that's absolutely fine, but you need to think where you are for your level. So it's quite a useful model. This is something I'd be interested to know if people have heard about before and have used. So it's the Johari window. It comes up in a lot of sort of textbooks and seminars about leadership and management, and it's mainly around who are you within a leadership team. So starting to be, when I did the fellowships before, just to give you a bit of an insight, a lot of work was spent that year looking inward and then trying to figure out how you fit into teams. And it was exhausting, because it's like breaking yourself down and realizing all of your bad habits, and then having to try and fix them and work out ways around them, or accept them and figure out what you're going to do next. And that's what the Johari window is about. It's about self-awareness, knowing what are the things everybody knows about me and I know about me. What are the things that people might not know about me and I need to tell them? So things like, if you're having a bad day, you might be someone that goes very quiet, and my team need to know that. They need to know that my being quiet isn't an agreement in a meeting. That's me withdrawing social contact. Or it could be things that you don't know about yourself that you do in high levels of stress, and that's where your kind of 360-degree feedback comes from. And then this last bit of the window, the bit down in the far right, is a really exciting part, because that's the unknown area. That's the untapped potential that neither you nor someone else knows you're capable of. And so that's where you're trying to get to. You're trying to untap that by asking all the right questions to understand the rest of the box. So some people find that really interesting as a reflective exercise. The other thing that a lot of people have heard about are these kind of personality tests. So your Myers-Briggs tests, where you fill in lots of questions and you find out, are you an extrovert, are you an introvert? And it's based on the psychology of Carl Jung, who's done a lot around being sort of introverted, extroverted styles, and it's been adopted into leadership. I find these really helpful. Some people don't like them. It's up to you, but they're helpful. And I think what's tricky as a trainee, particularly, and I was thinking about this today, is that so much leadership and management talks about team building, the importance of getting the team right, and you have very, very little control, thinking about that sphere of influence over your team as a trainee, because you're moving so frequently. You're moving departments and you're constantly building teams and breaking teams. And that's quite a challenging place to be for an organization, let alone an individual. So knowing things about yourself, as in your leadership style, is really helpful. But the most helpful thing that I've found as a trainee about knowing these things about myself are that they help me to manage and deal with situations with other people who are at different spectrums from me in their personality. So things that would have before made me feel uncomfortable because they would have seemed like conflict, or would have seemed like being dismissed, or whatever it was within the meeting, I can actually now start to think, oh, I think that's just how that person communicates. I'm actually an introvert, which means that you like time to think things over, not necessarily that you don't enjoy being in a public forum, but that you like time. But actually maybe that person is more of an extrovert, so they speak their mind immediately and it makes it sound like they know what they're talking about, which may well be the case. But it's about understanding, does that make my view less or more valid? How can I contribute to the meeting? So it's about recognising that in yourself. And I don't know if anyone's done Myers-Briggs and wants to share what they are, but you can in the chat pop in who you are if you've done it before. So this is what you get told. You get 4 letters. It'll tell you which type of person you are, and then it's like a horoscope. You decide if you like all the bits that seem positive and you dislike all the bits that seem a bit negative. But it's more about where you are, and you can find them from all sorts of things. So you can decide if you're Star Wars, you can decide who you are in Harry Potter, you can decide who you are in Game of Thrones. I think this is dangerous only because people want the character that they like the best. So everybody wants to be, I don't know, Arya in Game of Thrones, and very few people want to be Littlefinger, but essentially it tells you about how you work as a leader. One thing as a trainee, thinking about you getting involved with leadership opportunities, is really understanding what type of team member you are. So you may need to step into leadership roles, but a lot of the time you're going to be supporting senior colleagues or senior members of the multidisciplinary team who need you to help them in being a good follower. And there's a lot of discussion and papers, and I'm more than happy to point people in the direction of those if it's something that interests you, around this kind of followership, and knowing that by being supportive to a leader, you're actually showing a lot of leadership characteristics and capabilities, because you can identify that that person needs you to be doing something different, and that different types of personality traits that you have inherently and different skills that you've picked up along the way, you might use in a different setting. So for example, an easy one to analyze is like your emergency crash call situation. That's a very command and control type situation, and you very obviously hand over leadership if you need to step in and do something practically for the patient. You would say, I'm no longer able to lead this scenario, I'm going to hand over to you whilst I do the cannula, for example. That might mean that you use much shorter sentences, you can take a different position within the team from being in a multidisciplinary team meeting, like one I was in this evening, where we're talking about a really complex case and everybody's trying to think around the case and get the right outcome for the family and the patient with the team, where you need to do a lot more listening and be a lot quieter and a lot more reflective of what people are telling you. So that's a little bit around these kind of situational leadership models and being a good follower, as well as being a leader that can adopt into a different path. Does that sort of make sense? So I guess you could say, well, that's great. There's all these tools out there, and I've got like no time to learn all of them. Kind of, so what next? What I would say as a trainee is use your multi-source feedback. It's really useful if you pick people that challenge you a little bit to be included in your multi-source feedback. It's very tempting to ask all the people that you know will A, fill it in, and B, that you work with, that you like. But if you are really brave and you ask people that you think, oh, I don't know if they really get me or if I really get them, or we've had a few times where that's been hard, I promise you, you will reap the rewards if you're in a place to receive the feedback. And that's the key. You don't read that feedback just before you start a night shift at your most vulnerable. You want to have a read of that when you've got support of colleagues around you to help you see what can make you better. And there are some specific leadership ones around. The other thing I wanted to just touch on were values, because I think as a trainee, before I did any leadership, like proper leadership training, I sort of felt that there was this other corporate world that I didn't really want to be part of. And I think because the NHS were kind of shielded from a lot of the business of the organisation, it kind of felt like a bit of a dirty word or a bit of a dark side of medicine to be worried about values and corporate identity and brand and who we all are. But actually, I think values are a really interesting thing, because organisations create these and they're never negative, are they? I mean, values are a positive thing. They're what you want to aspire to be. So it's very hard to read a list of values and not agree with them, because they're pretty much you know, non-negotiable. Everybody wants to work in a place that's open and welcoming and friendly and puts the patient first. That obviously that's what we're doing. But there is something really important about understanding when you're kind of stuck in the day-to-day as a trainee, you're doing all the hard long shifts and it's a tough time and you're looking after a patient and it's, you know, it's been a really tough shift. To be able to step back and think, wow, like we've done this within a structure and an organization which believes in something really fundamental that matches with me. So for example, the NHS, I think most people are aware that it's built on principles, and one of its founding principles is that it's free to all. So free at the point of access to all. And for a lot of people, that doesn't make a difference to you at Tuesday at midnight when you're putting a cannula in a child and it's stressful. But if you have some time to sit back and to think, well, that's amazing that we've got that I'm part of an organization where we've got the ability to provide care, that person does not need to worry about the cost of that. That really fits for me with my values. And that's where I think they start to have an impact. It's not about what they say, it's about how it makes you feel. And that's why it's really important. And I don't know if people have read the NHS Constitution. It's a 16-page PDF document. It gets updated every 10 years with, you know, sort of what the Constitution is, but it's built on the same principles. And I just want to read you out because I think it's quite nice to remember for most people in this meeting who are working for the NHS what that founding principle is. So think about this. So you could work for an organisation which belongs to the people, is there to improve health and well-being, support you mentally and physically well, to get better when you're ill, and if you cannot fully recover, to stay as well as you can until the end of your life. It works at the limits of science, bringing the highest levels of human knowledge and skill to save lives and improve health. It touches our lives at times of basic human need, when care and compassion are what matter most. And I think that's pretty nice organisation to work for. And it makes you feel emotive. It makes you think, yeah, I want to get out there and work for that organisation. So I think, yes, it's not for everyone to read the values, but just remember and hold on to that when it's at tough times, because that is what it's been built on. And if you can come back to that and point to that and say, look, are we doing it by this? Then I think that's a pretty nice place to start in your leadership journey. So it's a 16-page document, it's worth a little look. So enough emotion, and we're going to move on a little bit, because leadership is also about, I guess, from what I wanted to know as a trainee, and I suppose this is what people would hope to get out of it, is how do you actually lead someone through a project that you would like to get off the ground. So if you can have a think about a project you've done or been part of that was a success or was useful or went well, and I want you to think not just what happened, but why did it go well? What was it about the project that meant it went well? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to join in. So yeah, so Katie's mentioned that supporting late preterm babies on the postnatal ward was a project she was involved in, and that getting the midwives and the breastfeeding support workers on site early was really important. So yeah, speaking to the right people, finding your allies. We'll talk about them as stakeholders, which is a very kind of corporate term, but I like to think of them as your allies. Or your champions. I quite like that sometimes. Who's your whatever word works for you is fine, but that's a really important point. And I'm hoping that people who are having a think at home are actually managing to come up with something that they think went well, and that they think perhaps they did something. What else? Why do projects work when they work? Someone kept driving it through to the end, even when everyone was busy. Things would have otherwise fallen through, given the energy ongoing. That's a super example, because it's about having the energy at the right point of the of the process. Some people will have energy at the beginning of a project, will be full of ideas, absolutely on it, then run out of steam. Other people will be of no interest in a project until it gets near to the end and they want to do all the fine details. And you need to know who are your energy givers and when do you get in touch with them, and who kind of do you need to get in touch with that you might need to give them some energy. So it's a really important part of getting things off the ground. Running sim sessions in situ on the ward and ED, had to keep making sure we did the session even when people were not keen, getting seniors to support. Yes, so the constant feeling as a leader of dragging people along with you, which feels really not what you're meant to be doing, but actually that enthusiasm that you have to carry sometimes to get people over the hurdle of getting something that actually does have a lot of benefit. And that's a hard balance, I think, because there's a bit about being responsive to feedback, so knowing if people are actually getting what they need out of it. And I think that point really brings us nicely to what I wanted to say next, which is about having an aim. Now, those of you who've heard me talk before will have seen me do this picture, but it's one of my favorites, and I don't know if anyone recognizes it. It's I'm seeing a couple of people smiling, so maybe people remember this story. It was a few years ago, and essentially there's this painting which on this side of the screen here was this fresco in a church in a small rural town, and it needed to be updated and sort of renovated, as you can see. And someone in the congregation, a lovely lady in the congregation, said, "Oh, I can do this. I've got paints. I'll do it for free for the church," because it meant a lot to her. And this was the outcome of what she did, which I don't know what people feel about that as a painting. I'm not really an art critic, so I'm not here to judge, but I don't think it was what the congregation were expecting, and it probably wasn't what the lady doing the painting was expecting either. So if the aim was to improve the painting, I think we could probably agree that that's not really happened. What was interesting about this was that later, because of the fact that this went viral, that this was such a terrible painting, this really small town started to get huge influx of visitors and donations to the church. So it's actually quite a nice story in the end, because what she's been able to do is this lady has like boosted the funds for this church to an incredible level where they can now fix the roof and all sorts. And she's brought together a kind of disparate congregation of people that now all are interested in this small town, and improved the tourism. So there's now 150,000 people a year or something, before all the travel situation changed, who were visiting this small town that had a population in the few thousands. So I think it's really important when you set out to know what are you aiming for, so that you can appropriately assign tasks and you can bring people on board and you can get to the outcome that you want. But don't ignore some of the unintended, sometimes drawbacks, but sometimes benefits of trying stuff out. So this is something that people will be familiar with who've done the quality improvement change champion stuff through London School of Paediatrics, or in fact have been at any meeting that I talk at, because I always have to bring quality improvement up. I think it's a really useful methodology for trainees because it's a rapid change. You can instigate it quickly, and with you changing rotations so frequently, you can actually start to see benefits of what you're doing. And the fun bit about quality improvement, once you've got your head around the structure, is that you can start to experiment and test out different styles of management around different things. So I'm not going to go through and force everybody to tell me what's in this. That's a whole other talk. But essentially, your model for improvement develops like this. So you've got your aim at the top. What are we trying to accomplish? So it's the same, as you can see, as that GROW model that we had earlier that we talked about. What are we trying to accomplish? The next question you ask, which is the question very few people remember to ask unless they've been trained fully in quality improvement, is how will we know changes in improvement? And that's defining your measures. What are the measures of success? In the business world, that would be your KPIs, your key performance indicators. In medicine, we talk about it more probably in patient experience or outcome measures. So, and your measures are balanced. So you've got outcome measures, which is defining the actual thing. You've got balancing measures, which are, is there anything adversely happening because of this change that we've put in place? And you've got measures which are process measures. So they might not entirely represent the outcome you're looking for, but they give you a rough idea. And then the next step is about thinking about what changes could you implement to try and make that happen. What ideas do you have? So it's a useful model, and I do this for a lot of projects, a lot of leadership type projects that you get involved with, even when I don't necessarily then go on to do a full project, because it's a good starting point, I think. Even if you think about it for a meeting, like what is the aim of this meeting? How are we going to know if the meeting's been useful or not? And what are the ideas we've got to make this meeting run more smoothly? It's quite a neat model for lots of other things. But then the bottom bit is the bit everybody loves because it's the PDSA cycle. So you do all your planning, do, study, act, and you can do that rapidly. And the difference between audit and quality improvement is that that is a rapid cycle, days, weeks, patient to patient, whereas an audit would be 2 time points. And both have got benefits, which we can talk about. A really lovely leadership quote is that some is not a number, soon is not a time. So when you're thinking about leadership journeys, trying to get things off the ground, getting people on board, nobody likes a sort of wishy-washy, this is when we're doing something. And many people, when we start talking about things like leadership and management, sort of put it to one side thinking, oh, it's not, it's just an extra skill, it's an add-on skill, it's not as integral to what you're doing. So it's really important that you think about, when am I going to be at the next level of training? What skill sets do I want to have by that point? And how am I going to go about doing that? And really try and make a habit of being an improver. So I would say spending time planning is not time wasted. If that's what you need to do to think about a project and really do it, you should really be using the same amount of time planning, if not more, than you are doing your data collection, pushing the project through. And that's the same for when I do editorial work for journals. People think that submitting the journal is job done, submitted the paper, out the way, that's it, tick box ticked. But actually there's still a bit of work around having that time where you listen to feedback from other people about what's going on and plan out the article. So it's similar, it goes across all aspects of your life if you can get into good leadership and management habits early. Have people heard of the Pareto principle? This is the idea that you will get, which I love, by the way, that you get 80% of your output or your result comes from 20% of your input and time. So if you pick the right thing to put your energy into, you can get big gains, big results really quickly. But it also means that if you want to really get to that 100%, really fine tune something and lead a team really well, you're going to have to put in that extra work at the end and know who in your team is good at which bits of projects and which bits of leadership, so that you can, that waxing and waning that people were talking about trying to push them through when people are not really that keen, that's about getting people over the line and getting that last bit of energy so that you can start to get a sustainable change. So the Pareto principle is a useful one to know. The next bit about leadership is really, you've thought about you know, and you've maybe done some reflection, and that will continue. That's lifelong learning. That doesn't change just because you finish and you CCT. That is like lifelong. But you start to know a bit about yourself. You've tested out some new ideas and different things. But really, leadership is taking people along with you for the ride, right? So having a great idea is super easy. Lots of people have great ideas, but having an idea that sticks is hard. And one of the adages that I was told before, which I think really holds true, is that if your idea was the answer, it would be happening already, because the world hasn't necessarily waited on you coming along to say, have you thought about doing it this way? There's lots of ways you can influence change, and there's lots of times where pointing out something isn't working is the right thing to do. but it's about understanding the context, the environment, the culture that you're coming into, and what's been tried before. So it's asking as many questions as it is suggesting answers. And at that point, I think it would be helpful to show you this, which is a really lovely video. Now, let me just do that and try and share my screen. Give me 1 second. We did do this earlier and it was smooth as you like, but it's not.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume?
Right, seamless, I think you will agree. Okay, I'm going to share this video with you. We're going to listen to the first 4 minutes, and I think it's a really useful video. He's much more eloquent at explaining the point than I will.
Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions? For example, why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access, the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight, and the Wright brothers beat them to it? There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery, and this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operated it. As it turns out, there's a pattern. As it turns out, all the great and inspiring leaders and organizations in the world, whether it's Apple or Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers, they all think, act, and communicate the exact same way, and it's the complete opposite to everyone else. All I did was codify it, and it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because you understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done. That's how most sales is done. And that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do. We say how we're different or how we better. We expect some sort of behavior or purchase or vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers, the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients who do business with us. Here's our new car. It has great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You ready to buy a computer from me? All I did was reverse the order of the information.
So I'm going to pause it there
People don't buy what you do,
for you guys. Let me just
people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains
change
why
this
every
round.
single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3.
So I don't know if people have any thoughts on that, or want to have a think about why we might have shown that now. Or if people have any, if they think it's relevant to them. Inspiring, not inspiring. Useful, not useful. I think it's quite an interesting concept about how we communicate with people and about how great leaders get action, get results. And it might just be something to have a think about the next time you're struggling with that in a conversation or in a kind of meeting where you're trying to get something through. Yeah, so Katie's just said that the video is a bit like starting with saying what you're trying to do. We're trying to keep babies with their mums, so we're doing these changes. You want to build people in to what you're doing from the beginning. So you want them to feel that emotion. You want them to understand, why are we doing this? And that's a really powerful leadership tool, and especially as a trainee. So say when you're stepping up and it's been a really busy shift and you're trying to get people through, it's really easy to get sucked into procedural things. So let's get through as many people in A&E as we can. Let's get people out the door. Let's get the family, let's get those bloods done, and forget the why around what you're trying to do. Really, you're trying to reassure those families that their health is in good hands, or you're trying to find a diagnosis, or you're trying to support somebody in a really difficult time. You need to be able to zoom in and out, I guess, of why you're doing it and what you're doing it, to protect yourself, but also to remember that there's a family and a patient at the end of what you're doing. So leadership in the NHS is more emotional, I think, than people give it credit for. But what I like about that video is that it also shows that you can be emotional and emotive in industry. You know, it obviously comes to profit, but there is room for that. And I think that's an important leadership lesson. I said we would talk about stakeholders, and I think this is often where people get a little bit stuck. Your stakeholders are vital when you're a leader. You need to understand, even in the short time as a trainee that you are within a department, who's involved in this and what's going on. And if you're trying to make change and you're really wanting to do that in your leadership journey, then understanding who has power, who has impact or interest in what you're doing, and how much you engage with those people is really vitally important. So on the one axis, we have power, and on the other axis, we have impact. And if you have someone who has very little power over the situation and very little interest in what happens to them as a result of your project, you really don't need to keep badgering on at them and getting them on board just because it's nice to have everybody like you. You need to think, okay, I'm going to use my energy to get the most useful situation or the most advantageous situation for why we're doing what we're doing. So the people who have the most power and the most interest, you want to keep them engaged throughout. They're your key stakeholders. They're your steering group. They're the people that you get back to, you contact all the time, letting them know how things are going, touching base. Those with a lot of power, but less impacted by what you're doing, so maybe slightly more senior members of the team, slightly what we call opinion formers, those are people that you want to keep in the loop. So you want them to know that things are chugging along, that you need their influence, but actually they don't lead the direction of that change. And then there are some people who the impact of what you're doing is going to be huge, but they don't have a lot of power in that situation. And this is often patients, but I would argue increasingly patients are moving into the key stakeholders, which is where I want to see them. But often it's maybe other members of the team that have not been thought about in the initial planning stages, people who, by changing a system, you're going to have a massive impact on them. So if you're going to say everybody from tomorrow has got to wear scrubs, which is what happened in our hospital, well, there are some people who have very little power over that decision, but the impact on them is huge, like laundry, porters, domestic staff. So you need to keep those people informed. There's no point in making the change and not bringing those people with you on it. And they're vitally important, but you don't need to let the patients know that you're doing that tomorrow and do a big campaign, because to them that might not be that important and they don't have any power to change that. So they move into a different box on that occasion. But it might be that in your department it is really important, because the whole purpose of where you treat patients is a more holistic setting. So everyone being in scrubs is a massive issue, because it really changes that patient dynamic, and then they move into a different box. So just keeping an eye and not thinking that, okay, this is a project in the health service, therefore these people, the managers are in this box, the doctors are in this box, the patients are in this box. People can move from one thing to another and within teams. So when you're thinking about leadership, this is quite a useful exercise to do, to think, who are my stakeholders? And a big lesson in leadership, and I've borrowed this, shamelessly stolen this from the quality improvement slide set, is making failure your friend. We're not comfortable with that in medicine. It's something that's hard to appreciate and understand, and it's hard when the stakes are really high, and that's why we're not comfortable with it, and that's a good thing. But what it does do is it often stops us from doing things that are exciting and different, because we're worried about having a negative impact. And I was listening to something the other day whilst I was putting this together, and it did say that if you have imposter syndrome, it's just a sign that you're trying something new. So I think if you've got that feeling of, why am I in this room? Oh dear, this could go horribly wrong. You know, that is part of the leadership journey, and just having the awareness, the self-awareness to know that that's what you're feeling is a really positive thing to reflect on. And the other thing we say about failure is, if you've prepared the groundwork, you've made the surface nice and clean, you've done all your thoughts processes, and you break the egg, you can still make something with that egg. You can make scrambled eggs, you can make a cake, you can do something, and someone might let you try again if they see that you were really careful in your preparation. So don't be frightened of it. My other quote, which I want to claim as mine, I've definitely heard it and I use it all the time, but I don't think I invented it, is that lamination is the end of innovation. Once something is laminated and on that wall, that is it. That is what is happening. That is the guideline. That is the status quo. That's what you got to beat. So just be generous with others would be my advice from my experience in allowing people to take something of your idea and run with it. As long as the aim is clear and you're not deviating from it, then if you get to the aim in a different way, it's okay. But bin the laminators. These are the opportunities that I think are available to everybody in leadership and management as a trainee. You can go to departmental and operational meetings. That doesn't mean you have to go to everyone or hundreds of them in your training, but at least knowing what they are. Shadowing is something we don't get a lot of requests for, but is really useful and something that I did in later training, mainly because I wanted to understand how to manage a clinic and I wanted to understand how to manage an inbox of emails. And actually sitting down for half an hour, shadowing a consultant whilst they dealt with referrals, emails, was hugely beneficial and has dramatically changed how I manage my inbox now as a newly qualified consultant. Doesn't mean I always get it right, but you try. Mentoring is available. We know that that's something that I'm sure a lot of the other speakers have talked about in their talks as well. Multidisciplinary team meetings and sessions that you have in your hospital, even if it's small huddles that you're having around the board or virtual huddles, they're great opportunities to see the dynamic and how things work. Who's always on their phone, who's interested, who's really in the moment in those meetings. Really observe and learn from other people's leadership styles, engagement styles. If you can in your training, do ask to get involved in incident reports and serious incidents, following what happens to a complaint through from PALS doesn't really take that long. If you think about, if you mention it at your earliest meeting with your supervisor, you could follow something through in the department you're in, and you can actually start to see some of the changes that come along. But if you can't do that and you don't have the time and you're right at the end and you're about to CCT, then things like M&M meetings or having a sit down with the PALS team and chatting through what the process even is really useful. Teaching is both attending and delivering. It's not everyone's comfort zone. Do it. This is entirely new, online learning like this. For me, I like doing workshop-based stuff. I like people's interactions. It's like you're talking into the ether. You don't know if it's landing. People are bored, they don't care, or they love it. But try it out, say yes, give it a go. Projects that you want to be involved in and passionate about are there. And also there is coaching available through the professional support unit. And I just wanted to highlight that. I've got a resources slide at the end that you can have a look through, but I did just want to highlight that that is available. There are obviously interesting and other things that you can do out of training, fellowships, leadership programs, online learning. There's loads of resources which I've included links to, but I think there is enough in your training and you're doing enough already that you can get what you need from what you're doing.
Emma, so could I quickly check the coaching bit that you said is through HEE? That would mean that it is available to all the trainees outside London as well, right?
So London, Kent, Surrey, Sussex training numbers have free coaching, but Health Education England may have an organisation arrangement with your organisation. But I know that our professional support unit from London, there's provision for coaching sessions.
Sure, thank you.
So I guess one of the things I just wanted to kind of end with or round up with is thinking about what have you done today that is a leadership example of leadership. And I suspect almost everybody will have an example of something they have done. So you can think on that and have a little think, and I'll take you through something that I've done. So I sent out an agenda for a meeting, which sounds like a super simple thing to do. I've got my box ready. I could tick it off or half shade it or fully shade it, however you want to do it in all these job lists that we create. But actually, I started thinking in preparation for this that actually there was a massive amount of leadership that you could reflect on. So the template for the agenda depends on the meeting itself. Is it a decision-making meeting or an information sharing meeting? You want to highlight that for people. There's two different skill sets to participating and leading those sessions. But if you set the expectations out in the agenda, and the order is quite important as well. So you want everyone's attention not right at the first minute, because people are still coming in the door or zooming in or signing in. So you need 5 minutes maybe to get the biggest thing on the agenda, and then you don't want it right at the end when everybody's rushing off because they've not left enough time between two appointments. You need to think about chairing the meeting. Who's going to take the minutes? Who's chairing it? And have that skillful attention to the task of chairing. And who's not in the room? Who are the absent voices? Who are the people that are not at this meeting that I need input from? Those stakeholders that we talked about. And think about that. And that made me think about how quickly do I send the agenda out? Do I send it out a week in advance so that some people that can't make it can feed into it? If I've got the luxury of that, that would be quite nice. And then it's about email management. So I've got my out of office on today. So anyone, once I've sent this out, any questions, I'm not going to respond to them tomorrow. So if there are those quick fire things that happen, people need to know that. Subject heading on the email is a good insider tip. Almost every CEO I've spoken to in all of my training has said that if there's not a subject heading on the email, they don't pay any attention. Some of them even go as far as to delete them. So if you've got something really important, put it in the subject heading and give them an indication of how urgent that is. And thinking about your sign off on your email, having the ability to get back in touch with you. So actually that really simple task, which I could have just not thought about, has got masses of leadership reflection. And that's something I think as a trainee you can really do. You can think about what you do on the job and reflect on it. So you can use these different models. The Gibbs model of reflection is a very formal one that we used in university. The RCPCH recommend this on their domain 6 information. I like the what, so what, now what. It's really simple. What happened? So what? What did that mean? And now what are you going to do? But there's also the toddler one. So if you're in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, you can just ask why, why. Every time you think you've answered the question, just say why again, and you'll find that you can reflect. And I think that's something you can do as a trainee. So these are my hints and tips. Be curious, learn about leadership, fill up that tank, do what you need to, but be mindful that this type of learning, where you're having someone talk to you, is only about 10% of your learning. 20% will be social, so having a think about it with someone else, having a discussion about it with a supervisor or a mentor, and 70% will be you trying stuff out, trying a different leadership style, taking control of handover, doing something a bit different, thinking, how am I going to manage that clinic? My third tip is take people with you. They'll be your allies, they'll support you, they'll give you energy, and you can give it back as you need it. Say yes to things, but then really learn the value of your time. Your time is important, and that of other people's is too. And if you respect theirs, they'll respect yours. Observe and reflect on things. You will be doing far more leadership than you suspect you are, I promise, if you think back through what you've done in the last week. And a mentor can really help with that. And then seamlessly share and shamelessly steal, but reference. Yeah, so look at what other people are doing. Share what you're doing and steal their ideas. But if you do use someone else's idea, then at least let them know you've done it. And that's my hints and tips. So I don't know if there are any questions just in the last little bit before we do a sign off. There is another video that I can put up while people are having a think, and if people want to put some questions in, if I can do this. Have we got any questions coming through, Katie?
Yes, there's a question about trying to change everyday behaviour being harder than sort of trying it in a project and making changes.
Yes, yeah. So changing everyday behaviours is really tough. It's like habits. And essentially, most of the things that I read about, there's some really lovely journal articles which I can share with the team, and they can put onto the site for you. But a habit takes 30 days essentially. That's what the psychology teams feel to change. So if you think you're going to try and change a whole team's mentality, that's going to take a bit of time, and culture is the hardest thing. Making a practical change is much easier than a cultural change. But if you put the investment in, it will be more sustainable what you get out. But I guess it's what I said at the beginning. Start with you. Can you maintain that change? And if you can't, then no one else is going to be able to. So you're the one that's the most passionate about it. So if you're the one most passionate about it and you can't sustain it, someone for whom it's 20th thing on their list is not going to be as excited as you. That would be my advice on that. And I think leading by example, I guess, the other thing with that not being put off that someone else isn't behaving how you want them to. If you continue to show that you would like it to be this way, eventually your infective enthusiasm will come over and someone will have to do it. Someone's asking about fellowships, the ones I did. So I did the FMLM, the Faculty of Medical Leadership and Management Fellowship, which was about roughly divided into 4 days a week doing a job, which was editorial registrar at the BMJ, and 1 day a week getting leadership and management training. So that was away days, going to conferences, events, doing online learning. The fellowship I did didn't have a formal qualification with it, which I chose specifically because I wanted to do experiential learning. I wanted to be doing a job and more like an apprenticeship model. So you got buddied up and you got a mentor who was really senior in the organisation. So I had, like, Fiona Godley was who I would meet with regularly and hear, and she would take me to meetings and we'd be able to see, and as the editor-in-chief, that was a huge insight into the workings of a non-clinical world, which was really good. And then the other fellowship I did was the postgraduate medical education fellowship at Great Ormond Street. which again was fantastic. And I think I got a lot out of that because I'd done one before. I was a really fortunate trainee to be able to get to do two. So I was able to take some of the skills I'd already learned about office relationships and managing your time and being your own boss in a lot of ways around how you divided your time, because your projects were suddenly, you weren't dictated to by a bleep, you suddenly were managing projects that were like weeks and months long, and I absolutely loved it, and I really got a lot out of it. So those were the two fellowships I did, but I think there are other ones like Darcy Fellowship and HE fellowships and NICE fellowships. There's loads, and I've put some resources at the end which I can share about where to find out information, and just keeping your eyes and ears open to those opportunities as they come along, and ask people about them. How to get a procrastinator without being judgmental. So I don't know if I can get a bit of how to get a procrastinator to do something without being judgmental of them procrastinating. I think it's about recognizing that the procrastination is part of them taking time to get on board with your idea, and probably not overwhelming them with too many changes all at once, or doing what I mentioned there about the agenda. So if you know someone really likes to weigh up options, giving them the space to do that away from the meeting where you need to make the decision, and being mindful of it is quite a useful technique when you've got people. I'm much more of a procrastinator. Once I've gotten to a decision, I think, oh no, I've really thought that through. I'm not really someone that will shout out an idea straight off the bat, and I love it when people are like that, because I think they've got so much energy. But what I find hard about that is that if somebody doesn't like my idea, it's really hard, because I've really bought into it. So I have to know that about yourself. Which one are you? I hope that answers that question. I like collaborating, work with others rather than leading alone. Often people expect leaders to lead alone. What's the future for groups and co-leaders, not single-handedly? I love that question. I think that's a super question. There's some really nice stuff from Michael West about like joy at work and the transferable leadership skills that you need to be able to pass leadership on at different points. I think we are really odd in that we judge people about having, you know, if you go to an interview, you'll be asked about, you know, what project have you led to completion? Or if you write a paper, who's the lead author? We're really obsessed with that leadership status. And actually, if anyone has ever done a project properly or written a paper collaboratively, you know that it is not one person's brainchild and work. And that's why companies have sort of CEOs or people or front team members that go out as the face of the company. If that's part of their brand and image, that's great. But otherwise, I think definitely keep enjoying collaborative leadership. Don't be expected to lead alone if that's not something that you get thrill from. You've got to be passionate about what you do, and you'll define what being a leader is. I think where I work at the moment, you lead on different bits of a project, and I suppose what you need to tease out is leadership and accountability. So you can not lead a project, but if you are the one the buck stops with, you need to know what's happening. So there's a bit about, as you transition from trainee into consultant, knowing whether stuff is ticking along, and knowing where the buck stops with you. So that's the only caveat to co-leaders, is, you know, really defining what role you're going to take. Procrastinator, new words. I like when people learn new things. So in the spirit of that, I'm going to share this video with you, which I really, really love, just as a kind of parting shot. And if people have got any questions, I'm happy for you to contact me. But this is where I think leadership and innovation comes through, and it shows you that actually over time, just because someone was doing something in the past in a way you wouldn't have done it, doesn't mean they weren't trying their best. So hopefully you can see this. It's the Formula One pit stops.
But Holland comes in for a pit stop. Time to refuel and change tires. Zumor himself changes the tires. Only 4 crew members, including the driver, are allowed to work on the car. It's the 10th time. Holland stays in his seat and get away. Let's watch. The tires are changed at last. A crewman polishes the windshield as Holland moves away just 67 seconds after he stopped.
So that's the end. That was just one of my favorite videos that I like, that I think shows teamwork, leadership, and how you can progress things if you've got some good ideas.